que é da Sandra junto com o outro rapaz, o outro é os dois. Eu falei, ele tá subindo na inteiro.
It's better if you stay from here. Okay?
Okay.
Because to show you and slide, it's the best configuration.
Okay. I'll try and stay around here.
Let's start. Senta aqui, é bom, porque aí você parece que tem gente, senão não parece que tem. Alô? Alô? Tá funcionando aí? Tá captando? Agora tá. Não ficou alto. Bom dia, bem-vindos a esse segundo Fórum de Março. A gente está aproveitando que teve um workshop entre o Brasil e a Inglaterra e a gente está aproveitando para passar um pouco das discussões e os pesquisadores do Reino Unido que estão aqui. Então, hoje a gente vai trazer o Dr. David Morgan, also called Dai. Ele é do grupo do professor Steve Evans. Talvez alguns de vocês se lembrem da palestra dele em 2013. Eles trabalham com manufatura, né, o Instituto de Manufatura, e na Universidade de Cambridge, com um olhar bastante grande para o futuro e para a sustentabilidade no ambiente de manufatura. O Dai vai agora dar uma perspectiva atualizada daquele momento, né, falar um pouquinho das novas pesquisas deles. Let me introduce in English, because it's also important. Dr. David Morgan is a research associate in Institute for Manufacturing at the University of Cambridge, and he is a lead researcher in Center for Innovative Manufacturing Industrial Sustainability. Yes, and he will talk with us about the future of manufacturing, the UK perspective. So we are so glad to have you here with us, and that's up to you now.
Obrigado. Thank you very much, Mali, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak here today. I'm very happy to be here in Brazil. We've been here both to do this talk and to do a workshop with David Bennett at the back there. And I'm very grateful to the British Council and FAPESP for supporting that and allowing me to be here today. I'd like to say a quick hello to the UK. One of your students, Sandra, has just joined us for a visit in the Institute for Manufacturing, and I believe she's watching online. So I'd just like to say hello, and I hope you're enjoying Cambridge, and I'll see you next week. So I'm going to talk about the future of manufacturing. It's a very specific UK perspective, and one of the things that I've enjoyed about this week is learning a little bit about the way manufacturing is done here and the way it's thought about. I was lucky enough to visit Natura earlier in the week, visit the wonderful facility that Fabian runs there. But this is a very particular UK perspective. So if you'd like to challenge some of the things that I say and comment on how Brazil would look at this or how it looks different in Brazil, I'd be really interested to have that conversation afterwards. So I'll give a quick introduction to myself and where I come from, and then I'll talk about the Future of Manufacturing exercise, which was a foresight exercise commissioned by the UK government to inform how they think about manufacturing over the next 50 years. I'll then talk about the research that we do in our group, which relates to that, and then finish with a possible agenda for industry, and we can have a discussion about that. As Mali said, my name is David Morgan. I'm a lead researcher at an EPSRC Centre for Industrial Sustainability. This is a government-sponsored initiative which runs across 4 universities to tackle sustainability as a challenge, and I'll explain more about what we mean by that later. But my background is in manufacturing engineering. I did my master's on that subject at the Institute for Manufacturing, and I did a PhD in polymer recycling processes. So that was more technical, and now I'm a researcher in industrial sustainability in Cambridge. So this is where I go to work, and this is where Sandra is watching us from currently. When we talk about manufacturing, we just to explain, we think of it not just as production, but as the whole cycle of understanding markets and technologies through product and process design to operations, distribution and related services. So it's the big picture of manufacturing rather than just the production of materials and goods. The way we do research is very much engaged with industry. So we have research and education which goes on within the building, and we develop services which are delivered out to government, industry and universities. We try and develop different ways of getting our knowledge out and used, because not many companies read research papers, sadly. So we have to find innovative ways of getting that out. So that's just a little bit of background about the way we operate. So I'm going to talk about the future of manufacturing, and again, this was internationally informed, but very much looking at what the UK can be doing about it. And one of the things that's interesting here is that the UK, what we have here is a timeline and manufacturing as a percentage share of the economy. And what we can see here is that the UK has been incredibly consistent in the trend which it has followed, unlike our international competitors. And it's been pretty much a straight line downward. And during my lifetime, manufacturing in the 80s was thought of as something that we didn't need to worry about anymore. We were going to be a service economy, the land of milk and honey. It was going to be fantastic, and we weren't going to need to engage with production and manufacturing anymore. Since around 2008, that view has changed slightly. The financial services had their little hiccup, and the government started to become more interested in manufacturing, and interested to the point where they're starting to talk about industrial strategy. This is from the Twitter account of the Department for Business and Skills. When I first started in manufacturing in around 2000, talking about industrial policy and industrial strategy was unheard of. You just didn't talk about it in government. But now they're much more engaged with the issue and trying to think about what it is and what it means for the UK economy and what it can do for us. And this report that was developed, this project, is part of an indication of that increased interest and renewed focus. So this is the glossy brochure. You can download this from the internet. There's about 220 pages. There's 37 evidence reports associated with it, and there's some really interesting stuff in there. And I'm just going to try and highlight a few of the ideas. The objective was to investigate changes and uncertainties facing UK manufacturing and how to capture and create future value. So it was the government thinking long-term about what role manufacturing is going to play in the economy. So there was about 2 years that they spent on the project with UK roundtables, international workshops, and, as I said, lots of evidence papers. There was a lead expert group and industry input. There was that took the scoping phase on. There was a period of research, and then the synthesis, bringing all those research papers together, over 2,000 pages of evidence to try and make some sense of what the future might look like. And then launched in 2013, just after, I think, Steve Evans spoke to you last time. These are the people from Cambridge who were involved. Professor Evans is the head of our group, and Dr. Mike Tennant from Imperial College we also work with, and he was involved in developing the paper on sustainability in manufacturing, which I was part of developing the evidence for. So there's been a lot of local input as far as Cambridge is concerned into the evidence. So we mentioned this was about creating and capturing value. What do we mean by value? Typically when governments think about manufacturing, they think about direct employment and wealth creation. So those are the things that we tend to focus on. I just want to show you this graph, which was just one part of one paper that was provided to the government, and it shows manufacturing employment in 1999 compared to all industries, and manufacturing employment in 2011 compared to all industries. And what I want to draw your attention to is these jobs are the process, plant and machine operations jobs, and these jobs are the managers and senior officials. So 27%, nearly 14%. That's 1999. If we look at the stage in 2011, there are more managers and senior officials than operators. Jobs in manufacturing are changing. It's not going to be necessarily the direct employment that's going to be the most important thing. It could be more in the wealth creation. One manager, more than one manager to every operator. So the conclusions they came to were that manufacturing is going to be about more than making a product and selling it. You will be bundling more services with products. Rolls-Royce Power by the Hour is a classic example. Selling of technological know-how. I don't know if you're familiar with ARM computers, but if you have a mobile phone, you almost certainly have an ARM chip in it. They don't make anything, but they understand the process of manufacturing and how to do that end-to-end, and that gives them a competitive advantage. They'll be remanufacturing of products, and all of these examples are already existing. But what the report was suggesting, that they're going to become more pervasive and that these models will become much more the norm. At the moment, we see maybe a few dozen companies that have these models and expertise. What we're going to see is a real shift, that more companies are going to be engaging with this, and it's going to become the norm rather than the exemplar. They looked into technologies, and these were the ones that they picked as being the most likely to influence change. So they defined 3 types of technology. One is massive incremental, so stuff that's already happening but will continue to happen and will become more pervasive. So we're already seeing the integration of ICT, and they're saying that's going to continue and become absolutely more pervasive. Sensors are going to be integrated into everything. There'll be sustainable technologies and new materials. They then defined some radical technologies, so things that are going to cause step changes in the way we do manufacturing. Bio and medical technology. We're going to be printing cells, potentially growing meat, not from growing cattle, but by growing it in a lab or a factory. Additive manufacturing is going to become mainstream, according to the report, complementing or displacing existing processes. Now, they did give themselves a get-out-of-jail-free card. They defined disruptive technology as currently unknown. There will be things that come along and change things in a way that's totally unexpected and that they can't prepare for. So they didn't leave themselves as being hostages to fortune and saying these are the only things which are going to affect it. They introduced the idea that there will always be disruption that's unforeseeable. Further conclusion, manufacturing is going to be faster, more responsive and closer to customers. There'll be mass personalisation of products on demand. You might be able to go into your clothes retailer and they might measure you on the spot and make the shirt or the dress that you're going to buy in a machine in the store while you wait, to your colour specification, to your specific sizing and styling notes. So the idea of even what a factory is will be changing. So it'll be distributed, high-tech, potentially modular, maybe in the home, maybe there'll be mobile factories which go around areas and provide products. There'll be more design freedom because we'll be digitally connected. You'll be able to download designs from anywhere in the world and print them on your 3D printer. And the whole value chain is going to become more connected. They'll be exposed to new markets. So again, this is where the British perspective is important, because we talk about the BRIC economies, Brazil, Russia, and so forth, and also the countries that are coming behind them. The middle classes of those countries are going to want to buy stuff, and we want to sell it to you, quite frankly. Some manufacturing will come back to the UK as the world changes, but it's not going to be this great influx that I think politicians are hoping for. We're not suddenly going to have mass employment in manufacturing again, but there will, where it's sensible, where there's value added in manufacturing and the production being closer to the customer, then we will see that come back to the UK. Skills is going to be a massive issue. I showed you the slide where there are now as many managers as operators. We have to understand the skills that those managers and operators are going to need in order to deliver the new world of manufacturing. So there will be strong demand. We have an ageing population in the UK, so we'll need to understand how older workers can interact in that system. Science and technology, mathematics will always be important, and increasingly so as the technical skills change. And there'll be a blending of technical and commercial skills. We need people to be able to understand the technologies and processes that are being developed, but also how to exploit them in the business context. What does it mean if we're growing more and more of our products? How does that change the way we design our manufacturing systems? And there's also the potential for human enhancement. We've already got Google Glasses, which help us see the world in a different way. And with the older workforce, there may be augmentations that we need to help them adapt to new work environments. And finally, thankfully, one of the most consistent messages from all the workshops, from the evidence papers, was that we need to be more sustainable. Growing urban populations and increasing resource demands are putting pressure on our systems. We were talking just before here about the water shortages that are being experienced here and the climate disruptions that are being faced elsewhere. Companies need to start preparing for this now in order that they can be resilient to these challenges. Climate change and supply chain vulnerability, whether it's incidents like Fukushima, floods in Thailand, the volcano in Iceland, which I cannot pronounce. These disruptions have caused people to start to think about how they organise their supply chains and whether it's sensible to do it in the way that they currently do. And there will be volatility in price of commodities. People will start to restrict supply of resources that they own, and companies which use less of that resource will be more resilient and more able to cope with those changes. And we will see more reuse of products, remanufacturing and recycling. The circular economy was one of the other themes that came out and is very popular and fashionable to be involved in at the moment, but it's something that we're going to need to understand and get better at. So those are the 5 key findings. There's more than making a product and selling it. Faster, more responsive and closer to customers. We'll be exposed to new market opportunities, increasingly dependent on highly skilled workers, so good people like yourselves who have PhDs and really understand the system that they're working in, and it'll be more sustainable. Now, a lot of people look at those and think that actually there's not that much new in there. What this has identified as trends that are happening now but will become very much more pervasive and important over the next 20 or so years. So, you know, people talk about sustainability now, but very few companies are truly engaging with it and delivering on sustainability. Sustainability in the future will be something that no one can ignore if they want to continue doing business, and I think it's going to be the same for the other 5 key findings. So, manufacturing will be a complex, value-creating system with emphasis not on production or services, but on being flexible, being able to flex your business models and offerings to create value wherever that is in the world. So it's, and again, you know, We understand already that manufacturing is a complex value-creating system. Not all politicians do. So part of this was an education process to help them understand the role of manufacturing in government. So that's the sort of context for, in the UK, how we're thinking about manufacturing at the moment. And now I just want to touch on some of the research that we do that looks into the sustainability element that was highlighted. Just briefly, this is some work by people from the Stockholm Resilience Institute, and this is just trying to characterise the problem. We are putting our global systems that we rely on under pressure. In the middle, you have the green space. That's their best estimate of the safe operating space for the planet. Where you see the chunks of red go beyond that, that's their estimate that we're exceeding the planet's carrying capacity. So climate change is one global force that they're worried about. Nitrogen and phosphor, very important for our agricultural systems and the way we deliver food and nutrition. Nitrogen, really worried about that. Phosphorus, quite concerned. And there are other areas where there is concern as well. Biodiversity, the reason that's so big is that they don't really understand that yet, but they are worried about it because of the rate at which the human system is affecting biodiversity. So that's just a kind of part of the global picture of why we need to change potentially the way we're operating. And this is just some text from the Sustainability in Manufacturing part of the UK Foresight report. What the key point here is that it's not just about climate change. There are a number of drivers, and we don't know which drivers and forces are going to affect which parts of the planet first. So you might be hit by water shortages, or food security might become an issue. But we don't know quite how they're going to play out or which ones are going to land first or hardest. So companies are going to have to learn, and countries, how to satisfy multiple constraints simultaneously. This is not about a single issue. This is about a whole range of things, and different parts of the planet will be affected in different ways. So we can't necessarily just afford to focus on climate change or a single part of the system. Why is industry part of the picture? Well, if we just look at climate change for a second, it's responsible for around a third of the global emissions. So it's an important and valuable chunk. Just a comment. Transport and buildings, it's often easier to design policy for that or to talk about it at a policy level because everyone lives in a building and most people use transport to get around somehow. So there's a natural understanding of that. Far fewer people have been involved directly with industry, so it can be a slightly tougher conversation to open up. And part of what we're hoping to do is to, through our research, better inform that. Companies, what are they interested in? One of our industrial collaborators made this comment. You can be profitable but not necessarily resilient, but you can't be resilient without being profitable. Companies are interested in sustaining themselves. They want to keep going. And so how do they do that in the context where they have to make money in the short term, but they're going to need to make changes to the business in the long term if they're not going to be subject to disruption as a result of the sustainability challenges they face. Very big picture kind of stuff, global problems, global systems. I just want to bring it something tangible and local. We visited China last December 2013, and we visited one of our research students who was back home. That's the picture from her balcony looking out across the street in her flat. And Hangzhou is a few hours drive from Shanghai, and it's not one of the major industrial areas, but it does have some industry. And typically they haven't been affected so much by the pollution. But when we came to visit, the scene from her balcony was like that. And It was thick. You could smell the air. You could taste it. It wasn't as bad as some areas, but it was just a very tangible view of how industry is affecting people's daily lives. When we were in Xi'an, later on that visit, one of our colleagues, he used to smoke, and he said the effect that the air was having on his lungs was like when he used to smoke 40 cigarettes a day. So this is an example of how, Western industrialized consumption is leading to problems in other parts of the world. So this is not me pointing at China and saying they're wrong. This is an outcome of the whole system and the way the whole system operates, and it's something that we'd like to try and help do something better about. So the way we characterize the challenge of industrial sustainability, we want to bring the benefits of industrialization to the world without the bad bits. And to do that, we think we're going to need to quadruple the output of the industrial system, but do so whilst emitting 80% less greenhouse gases and halving the resource use that we currently have, and all by 2050. And we think that means new approaches and new understanding, which we call industrial sustainability. I was saying earlier, everyone who does manufacturing research talks about being the next industrial revolution, so we apologise for that, but we think it's that important. We need to change in a radical way. Our main research themes equate roughly to sort of short, medium and long-term agendas. We look at efficiency, so how we can make today's products and processes in a low-carbon and resource-efficient manner. We're interested in what the next generation of factories will look like, how they will be operated, when you can put sensors on everything, when you can understand the environmental implications of decisions that you're making. And then we're interested in how factories interact with the rest of the world. What will factories of the future do? Where will they be located? How will we make decisions around that? And what are the implications for companies in how they need to start preparing for that future? We work closely with industry. This is a list of the collaborators. I don't expect you to read them all. We just want to show that there's quite a few of them. We have project partners that we conduct research projects with, and we have members of the centre who we engage with on an annual, throughout the year on a range of issues. Some of them are companies from a range of industries. Of course, being Britain, we have a brewer because that's very important. But we also have retail, automotive, FMCG, because we believe that there's things that we can learn from all industries, and that by helping industries learn from each other, that can be a good way to develop shared practice. Thank you. And we also have a range of size of companies, going from large multinationals to relatively small SMEs, because we want to understand the range of issues that are faced, so not just the giants, but also some of the smaller companies too. So, the first area I want to talk about is efficiency. I want to talk about chocolate, because it's very important. One of the observations that we have from industry is that there's variation between factories, and that there's variation which isn't related to the process technology or the product that's being produced. So we have a story, we can't give you the name of the company, but there's a company that makes chocolate, and they said that we have one factory, we'll call it Factory A, that can make 4 chocolate bars using the energy it takes Factory B to make 1 chocolate bar. So this factory is 4 times more energy efficient than this factory. Why does that happen? It's not process and it's not technology, because they're the same. So we said, what's your explanatory variable? And they said, it's CRIS. I was like, is that carbon heuristic reduction inventory system? It's a clever acronym. They was like, no, it's a person called Chris who's been getting 5% a year for 15 or 20 years. And that's the end result. So we're interested in how you develop CRISs, how you learn from CRIS, how you transfer the knowledge, how you multiply the number of CRISs we have in the world. So you look at companies like Toyota, who deliver extreme improvements over a number of years. So this runs from 1993 till about 2007. They're consistently finding improvements in their factory. So how do they do it? And one of the interesting questions is, how far can they go? How small can this slice be? Because we know that there are some companies that aren't very good, that have this massive performance variation, but we're really interested in how far the best companies can go. So we have a number of research students and industry projects who are working on topics related to this. We have one guy from Turkey who's working on eco-efficient changeovers. So how do you build an understanding not just of the cost implications of changeovers, but how the changeover affects environmental performance. We've got other people who are looking at efficiency practices and their application in companies. The maturity of the management systems. How do you make sure that your departments are aligned and all pulling in the same direction? We've got people who look at factory modelling and decision-making tools. How do you use the data that you have about your factory to improve performance and to interrogate different processes and operations? And we're also looking at how companies can build eco-efficiency into supplier relationships. So that's something that Sandra, hello again, will be working with us on in Cambridge. And we also have another Brazilian colleague called Hansen who is also looking into that area. So we've got big questions. How far can the best companies go? What's the size of the opportunity here? Because we think that this sort of efficiency is actually overlooked. Everyone loves buying a bit of kit, a technology, because that looks good. But it's costly. This stuff's free. It's management time. So there's a real opportunity there. And that saving can actually then allow you to buy the technology. So we're interested in what techniques help people deliver efficiency and how we spread those techniques. So we're looking to develop toolkits, techniques, games even, card games that people can play that help them understand how they can improve and how they can engage in the factory improvement. So that's the efficiency side. We're also really interested in business models. This has become quite a fashionable topic. Have people seen this?
Yes.
Osterwalder and Pingier. So really effective, really popular. People do workshops all over the world and use this to help think about their startup company or to address their business model. You don't see much on sustainability explicitly brought into that. So we're interested in the value proposition and how you can bring sustainability thinking into that, how to get people, when they're designing their business, to start to think about sustainability from the off. So the research that my colleagues did, based on a European project, started to think about how we think about new business opportunities. Quite often you start, I've got a new idea, new opportunity, fantastic. And then you run with that. But what the work that they did suggested was, if we think about not just the positive value that we could create, but how value is currently captured within the system, what value is currently being missed. So if you've got underutilized assets or resources, if you've got overcapacity, or you've got wastes which aren't being monetized or used, there's an opportunity there to do something. Because we're interested in sustainability, there's also an understanding that sometimes companies destroy value. We pollute the environment. We deplete non-renewable resources. So what this tries to do is to give a structure for thinking about the different value that's been created, missed and destroyed in the system, and sort of audit that so that you have a better understanding of the current situation. And then we get people to think about how you convert the value missed into a new opportunity, or how you take the value destroyed and either reduce or eliminate it, or reconceptualize it into value missed. So we studied one company who make sugar. They convert sugar beet into sugar for food and drinks companies. and they had a combined heat and power plant on site, which they used to heat their process and provide electricity. And that, obviously, through burning gas, you create carbon dioxide, and they also had waste heat. So they were destroying value with the carbon dioxide, creating climate change, and they also had heat left over after they'd used their process, which they weren't using. So what they decided to do was to grow tomatoes, because tomatoes respond really well to carbon dioxide and to warm environments. So they started pumping the carbon dioxide they were creating, and they're now the second biggest producer of specialty tomatoes in the UK. They've got an 18-hectare greenhouse site. So it was a really interesting way of taking something that was actually a negative and turning it into a business value proposition. We also want people to think more broadly about the stakeholders who are involved in the system. This is the tool that was developed by the research project, and it comes with a structured process to help people think about the business. So we start with the unit of analysis, and then so that might be a business or a product, and then we get them to think about the different stakeholders. We start with the environment, because that's often one that gets missed. We get them to talk about society and where they're creating value, where they're capturing value currently, or maybe they're destroying value, maybe they're creating negative things for society. And then we've got customers, employees, suppliers and partners, investors and shareholders, and there may be other stakeholders that they want to add, which are specific to their system. And so we get them to go round and think of all the value that's currently captured, where it's missed or destroyed, where there's a surplus or an absence of value. And only then do we get people to think about the value opportunities. We also want them to think carefully about what the purpose of the business is. Why does it exist? Because that's your key reference point that helps you make decisions about everything else. So once you've mapped this out, you then start to think about new opportunities, how you can combine value, how you can create alignment of interest between stakeholders. And we've used this tool at around 40 workshops at a firm level with SMEs, multinationals. We've used it at industry events. And it's an ideation tool, so it gets you thinking and bringing ideas in that you wouldn't necessarily have thought of to begin with. We can't claim that this will deliver you a sustainable business model, but we think that by introducing these concepts, it gives you a better chance of coming to something which has more sustainability built into it. The final thing I want to talk about is system innovation. This is the really hard stuff about how manufacturing connects to the rest of the world. Part of the output of the future manufacturing exercise that Professor Evans took was that there'll be 3 waves of change. At the moment we're in the business as usual, but focusing on efficiency. So how can we make ourselves more resilient by using less resources? We're also, beyond that, we're going to experience disruptions at a greater rate. Climate change, water shortages, these sorts of things will start to affect us in ways that are more impactful than they perhaps have to begin with. So we're really interested in experimentation. How do companies start to try and experiment and do things differently? How do they engage with the circular economy? What new business models will help? How do you develop robust supply chains when you don't know exactly where you're going to be hit from? Which problems are going to be the most pervasive? And what are the configurations that will emerge from that period of experimentation that will put us in a position where we can think of ourselves as being more sustainable? So the kind of research that our researchers are doing, looking at design language for industrial systems, I'm really interested in maps. And what we define, what we put on a map, how we design a map, makes us think in a particular way about solutions. So if we use the language of supply chain and operations management as it currently is, will that give us sustainability? Will that give us an opportunity to think carefully about sustainability? So what one of our students is doing is trying to develop a design language which is appropriate for talking about sustainable industrial systems? How do we think about the practice and principles that go into manufacturing and the design of supply chains and industrial systems, but bring that into context so people can understand the practice of implementation better? We're interested in thinking about the future, so scenarios for system change. How do people develop scenarios which are robust and allow them to think in a way that prepares them for the future? Predicting the future is really hard. It's really hard. So how do companies get a handle on what might happen and how to prepare for it? We're interested in system mapping and the capabilities that companies will need to transform their system. But we're also, so the big picture, but we're interested in the role of individual, the entrepreneur, the disruptive innovator within companies. How do they help change happen? And we're also interested in how people make sense in the circular economy. How do they engage and use modular design to help people? But the two main themes that we're thinking about and that's emerging from this, and my job over the next 6 months is to integrate all the ideas that are coming out of this into the kind of tools that I've shown you already. But experimentation and systems thinking are two of the key things that we're observing that will be important. Just give you a little hint of one of the experimentation things that are going on. We're working with Marks and Spencer's, who had a scheme called swapping. So the idea was, with this scheme, that if you take your Marks and Spencer's clothes, once you've finished with them, to Oxfam, which is a charity store in the UK, they will give you a £5 voucher to spend in M&S. So it's a way of encouraging recycling and reuse. The customer's happy because they get a £5 voucher that they can waive and spend in M&S. M&S are happy because they've got increased footfall coming back to the store, and Oxfam are happy because they've got some really good quality clothes that they can either sell in their stores or send on to the third world where they develop the charity. So in 2012 they got back about 4 million items, which approximates to about 1,700 tonnes, and the value of the fibre was about £5 million. That barely scratches the surface of the amount of clothes that they produce, so it's a very small percentage. They're interested in how they go to a much bigger percentage, how they really embed that as part of their business model, and how they do the circular economy, but how they do it much, much better. So we can't talk very much about the detail of the project, but it's just a really interesting thing to be a part of, and see a company trying to experiment with how they might do things differently. So these are my personal conclusions rather than the conclusions of the centre. I think we need to seek opportunities in efficiency aggressively, which buys time, knowledge and credit within an organisation for wider change. So often companies will start with an efficiency program and then will develop that into something bigger that starts to look at business models or product design. And part of doing efficiency, when you start peering in all the dark corners of your factory or the business, you start to better understand the whole picture. You've got more knowledge about the system, which allows you to think more systematically about the wider changes that might be possible or indeed necessary. I've mentioned experimentation. I think companies who have an ability to learn from experiments, who can conduct these experiments quickly, maybe they'll succeed, maybe they'll fail, but they'll learn from it and they'll do it better next time. The world we live in, the way we interact and manufacturing interacts with the world is complex. It's not easy to predict and plan. So learning becomes a really important part of the system. So if we want to do things in seriously different ways, we have to, if we want to do things in seriously different ways and not trip over ourselves or kill the company, we have to understand how to learn from experimentation. And finally, I think one of the challenges with sustainability is that it's often a very negative subject. You mustn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you should reduce this, change yourself. I think some of the early evidence we have is that new ways of doing business can be found which are better for everyone, that create a positive vision. one of the phrases that Steve uses is his insight from the manufacturing foresight report was that in the future people will say, please, can we have your factory at the end of our street? Because it'll give you cleaner air, it will give you cleaner water, and it will be a really great place to work. So that's the opportunity. Often when I do introductions to myself, I tell people what I do. Do manufacturing, and I say I love factories, and they go, "What?" And I do. I think they're wonderful places where people, money, and materials come together to do some really fantastic things. But we also know that they can be less good places, and that they're not always great places to work, and they can have a negative impact. So my personal motivation is to deliver a system where more people can love factories wherever they are in the world, and that they can understand some of the delight that I take when I visit factories like Fabian's wonderful place in Natura. So that's all I have to say, and I'm happy to take your questions and discussions. Thank you very much. Obrigado.
Well, we have time for 3, maybe, questions, and I will start. I'd like to explore the difficult to design the whole ecosystem to promote a sustainable business model. Steve used to say that you need to kiss a lot of frogs to find a prince. So it's really difficult, because to make it feasible, a new business model, you needed the whole ecosystem working well and share the value. So I would like you to explore this a little bit.
I think that's where experimentation comes in, and quite often people might do something small in a corner of the company where they can try something out and learn, and then spread that. So the change in the ecosystem starts from a small place, but then gradually spreads across the whole system. Because I think you're right, to make a step change in a whole system can be incredibly disruptive and difficult. So it's finding the balance between the urgency of the problem and the need to change rapidly, but without killing yourself, essentially. And I think that's where experimentation and learning comes in, and it's a pragmatic approach. It's understanding that you cannot change the whole system immediately, and that you cannot design the change from on high like some god. You have to be humble and understand that you will get some things right and some things wrong, but as long as you're continuously learning, that's how you may affect change in the wider system.
Questions? Okay, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I am Andrei. I'm starting electric engineering this year. So I would like to know, because manufacturing is rising every year from recent years, and I would like to know how it deals with the whole automation we have in this world. Because it generates lots of work, but at the same time, the automation contradict it. So I would like to know how it deals with the automation.
The issue of automation is huge. As you can say, it can bring high value jobs through the development of technology and the systems for managing that, but it can also replace people. And I think one industry that's starting to go through that discussion at the moment is the textile industry. So garments, traditionally very high labour content, but they're now they've been following the low-cost labour markets around the world, and even China now is starting to be superseded by other cheaper countries, and the companies are starting to think, well, can we continue to go down this route and to the low labour cost? Can we change by bringing in automation and make us less subject to those sort of economic changes when wages start going up? I think it's something that's generally inevitable. People will want to bring automation in, and it will affect people. It's how that process is managed which is the most important thing. I think it will happen. I have to say, I don't study this directly, so this is the layman's view. But I think we need to understand that it is happening and that we need to manage it effectively, so that when people do lose jobs, they have an opportunity to retrain, to go elsewhere, and to create new opportunities for them.
Hi, my name is Luis. I'm studying civil engineering. And in one of your transparencies, you showed us carbon emissions from manufacturing. I wanted to know if manufacturing will also be interested in reducing emissions caused naturally, not anthropologically, like geothermal carbon emissions or something like that.
Again, I don't know the science in that particular area, but I think people are interested in carbon capture and storage, so how they can try and take and sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. I think if we look at what we can influence most effectively, the non-anthropogenic emissions are very hard to affect and control, whereas we can control what we do in industry and how we do that. So I think that's certainly where the focus is at the moment, with carbon capture and storage as kind of a backstop for that. So if we're not doing well enough with industry, then we look to sweep it under the carpet effectively. We try to hide it through quite energy-intensive methods, I think. I mean, it's, we're using energy to pump carbon away in a place where it's safe, and it may be necessary, but I'm not sure it's the most effective or elegant solution. But it could play an important part in the future.
Thank you.
Afonso Fleury, Production Engineering Department. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to go back to the future of manufacturing slides. And after you finish your presentation with these 5 key aspects of the future of manufacturing, did the British government identify which industries are the most appropriate to deliver these characteristics? To transfer this to kind of industrial policy, how did it move afterwards?
I think the future of manufacturing took a broadly non-sectoral approach, so it was looking at across the different sectors which draw on manufacturing. So I don't think that the report was designed to be used in that way. It was more looking at the whole picture. I think they drew on specific examples, and there is a mantra going around government about high-value manufacturing. So anything that's perceived as high value, which is high skills, they're interested in, and that seems to be the focus rather than any particular sector. So that would include aerospace is often cited as high-value manufacturing, companies like ARM. So I think that's, and as I say, Steve and other people would be able to answer this much better than myself, but I think it's that trying to capture value and the high value, and wherever they can get it, they seek to develop policies which support that. So I think there's always a nervousness around government about picking winners and picking industries which specific industries in which to invest. So I think the high value manufacturing is their way of hedging against that, saying we want the good stuff wherever it comes from. But again, I'm not the expert on that.
So I'm Fabien from Natura, and I'm also doing a PhD here in the production department. So I have a question about, you've mentioned different levels of innovation, more incremental or progressive and more radical. And looking at sustainability, I think it translates in. You've talked about eco-efficiency and other routes, complementary routes, or more innovation. And some people or some specialists, they say there can be a tension between eco-efficiency and eco-effectiveness, so that if people are focused on eco-efficiency, they don't question the whole picture. So what do you think about this tension and the complementarity of these approaches?
I'd agree that one of the big debates is that tension between efficiency and more systemic change. The way I tend to think about it is that different people wear different hats. They have different roles. I think the factory manager doesn't think about the business model necessarily in the wider change. He or she is trying to operate their factory as effectively as possible. So it makes complete sense for them to think about efficiency and to go aggressively for that. If other people in the company aren't thinking about the wider issues, so the managing director, maybe they need to be thinking about the strategy and the business model. So I think for some people, as well as perhaps the efficiency. So I think there's a degree to which you can accommodate both within a given organisation, but efficiency is often a really important starting point for companies, because if they get some success with efficiency, they start to think, oh, there are interesting things beyond that we could do, and they start to earn money and credit and knowledge about the system. So sometimes that's the easiest conversation to have to begin with, but you then need to move the conversation on. It can't just stop at efficiency. There's a huge opportunity there, but with if you're just moving the energy somewhere else in the system, making life more difficult for your suppliers, there's the potential for rebound effect. If you're spending your savings, the money that you save on flights, you're not making absolute savings. So you absolutely need to think about it from the whole system view. But from a pragmatic viewpoint, efficiency can be a good entry point, but we need people to go beyond that once they've started. Does that answer your question?
I think it's very difficult to give a general answer to that. But yes, I agree. In some cases it can work, and sometimes it can be questioned. And sometimes people who innovate, they start from zero.
Yeah.
And if you work on eco-efficiency or an efficiency, then you have some conservative force within your system that prevent you from really seeing some opportunities or some really threats. So it's difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. We don't have time for more questions because we have to finish the transmission. For sure, you can stay and discuss more. But before end the transmission, I would like to thank you so much for your presentation. It was a pleasure to have you here with us. And gostaria também de agradecer o pessoal que assistiu aí com a gente o fórum, agradecer o apoio de TI e convidar vocês para os próximos fóruns do LGP. Tchau, boa tarde agora já. Tchau.
Obrigado.